Another thing I wanted to discuss was, so you've been an executive coach, and coaching and mentorship is really part of what IMAGO does, and very close to how we deal with our partners and counterparts. So I wanted to get your sense of what is the coaching and mentorship at IMAGO, and how is it unique?
So let me distinguish between the two, because they're two different processes. The coaching basically says, where would you like to take this? What would you like to do? What are the goals that you have? And let me accompany you with that. The mentoring is, this is how I did it. I'm offering you how I've done it. Maybe you want to do something like that. So the coaching part of it is that what we try to do with our various partners is more on the coaching side, where we try to say, okay, these are things that we know, but what would you like to do? And then we try to follow the lead of the partners. And that is also something that we then try to impart in them so that they're able to do that. So it's less directive, less hierarchical, not necessarily like truly like a horizontal kind of thing. We don't truly believe that that actually happens. We recognize that there are often hierarchies that have to be considered. But what the coaching does is then it provides the capacity for me to be able to find my next level, my next phase, my next scale, if you will. The mentoring is then more like, this is where we have expertise, we know how to do this. You want to try what we did? Because it'll probably make it easier for you. And so with our interns and fellows, I would say much more of what we do is closer to the mentoring piece of it, meaning that we recognize there are ways that we have done this. We invite them to see that this is a way that we do it. They get to try it on. But what we love is when people adapt creatively to their own style. We love to see that. And in terms of the coaching with the staff, what we're trying to do as we develop a new cadre here is to provide, okay, where do you want to go in terms of who you are professionally? Okay, here are some parameters. Now let's support you on that. And what I think is key to those approaches, both within the organization and also with our partners, is that we're trying to live into what we say we believe, which is really challenging. Because there's one thing to profess it, it's another thing to actually put into practice. And it gives us empathy for how difficult it is for some of our clients, partners, to do these kinds of things, because it's not easy. It really takes a different orientation to how things are done. And we're also recognizing that with some personnel we've had before, is that, do you really mean you want us to figure out where we want to take this? Aren't you just going to tell me what to do? Yeah, we're going to tell you what to do to a degree in terms of, standards of excellence, commitment to process, of course, all of that, absolute total respect for the clients and partners with whom we work. Yeah, we're going to tell you that part. But beyond that, let's see what we're going to create. And that is a challenge to do, but we're trying to do it.
Yeah, no, practice what you preach is always, it's very hard. But,
it really is.
So at work, we always speak about what we call the IMAGO Way.
Yes.
And it's something we understand, but I would love for you to describe to an audience that doesn't know. How would you describe the IMAGO Way?
Okay. Every time I talk about the IMAGO Way, I say it slightly differently. I start with a different facet of this beautiful gem. But let me speak to the part that I think would be most important. So I often start off by talking about the co-creation. Co-creation is at the heart of the IMAGO Way. And the co-creation begins with the relationship. And the relationship is the sacred space. Okay. And what we try to do in the IMAGO Way is to recognize with great respect and empathy how you honor the other, to the point where you recognize that there really isn't an other, that we are as one in this. Wow. That's the first part. The second part of the IMAGO Way is then, okay, the people who are closest to the experience, the struggle, the pain, the challenge, the opportunity of it, are the ones with the knowledge. They may not have all the resources, but they know what it is that they need. So how do we invite a trust-based conversation so that we in that relationship can do that co-creation? And then, okay, then let's figure out where in the system there are these pinch points, these tensions. Let's see if we can untangle some of those tensions, turn down the heat on stress and conflict, so that we can begin to find pathways iteratively to create a different story. And in creating that different story, let's begin to look for small evidence that grows and grows and then ripples out until we're beginning to see something that goes to scale. And then once it goes to scale, then how did we do that? Let's go back and look at what we did. And let's see how we can replicate that. And let's make sure we keep these accountability structures in place, because that keeps it and that sustains it. And then that's the question. How do we sustain this? And so that people know that we can do this, build confidence around that, and go forward. Now, that's sort of like the process of the IMAGO Way. But the other part of the IMAGO Way is the invitation to conversation about the most important things that we're about. That what I am about, what we are about, collectively and individually, there's this ongoing reciprocal mutuality that is built into that. And this mutuality often speaks to the challenges, the shadow, the darkness that we have as human beings, and also those that we encounter in a larger context, and then how to not get so overwhelmed by that, that in our circles of influence that we can begin to do the parts that we can, and to trust from that space of action, that we can then stimulate, invite, innervate other people to do the same thing. And that's core. And then the last part, just most difficult and continuous, is for us to live into that ourselves as IMAGO, to constantly challenge ourselves to say, are we living into this way? And can we then convey to others what this is about? And bit by bit, piece by piece, we are now able to do that. And that's the essence of the IMAGO Way.
Yeah. A lot of it, at least from what I was hearing, was about this shared human experience in some way that reflects in the work. And I guess this is a bit of a transition, but I wanted to ask you about, so, I mean, it's a transition, but it's also related in some sense. So a lot of your recent work in IMAGO has focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these are very, very difficult topics, many of which require us deep inquiry within ourselves and introspection. Yes. So how do you engage organizations in meaningful and productive dialogue on these topics? And how does this facilitate change, or how do we even talk about these? Because they're so polemic, or and so there's so much we hold within ourselves on these topics. So I would love to hear that.
See, I think it's kind of interesting because I don't think we as IMAGO are actually doing anything differently than what we were doing before. The language of diversity, equity, and inclusion implies that there's this thing, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that is different from attending to our common humanity. Yes, there are issues of power, history, hierarchy, abuse, exploitation, oppression. Of course, those are true, and they have definite meaning, and they're related to race and color and nationality and class and caste. Of course they are. And the issue is that these are conversations that we were already having. And now it's a matter of then elevating those conversations to put them in the context of race, gender, sexual orientation, nationality, ethnicity, and the like. What I believe is important about how we're approaching this is that we as an organization, if you look at us, we are already international. We are multi-generational. We have a full spectrum of races. We have pretty broad social class background and bring different sexual orientation and gender identities to this process. So this is already who we are. So the mirror of us out into the world is that this is a space and place where we are already working as an organization. That's the first part. The second part is then we try to translate what it is that we have learned amongst ourselves into conversations. And just like we have had to do in order for our partners internationally to trust that we're really here, is that when we go in to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, as it is called, then we are simply saying, let's have the dialogue. Let's figure out how to really make this space sacred. Let's make it safe enough, but brave enough for us to enter places of deep polarization, but with a deep abiding respect for the different perspectives that we have. Let's figure out where we are on that journey. And then on that journey, then how do we learn from each other? And let's have it be a space of continuous inquiry and listen to each other far enough out so that those trigger spaces, those automatic responses are not what we do to each other. That what we're trying to do is learn from each other to get to a different conversation so that we're creating more of a shared narrative. And even if we disagree, at least finally, someone heard me all the way through without naming me this way, or blaming me this way, or shaming me this way, or pressing me into doing more work around this than anybody else because of who I am and how I look. And so I believe what we're doing is just making it available in the language of DEI, much as we have in everything else that we do. And that's the beauty of how we've been successful at it. And I don't want us to become like a DEI space, but when we're invited to do it, I think we have the expertise without imposition to invite people to the conversation.
Yeah, that really ties in all the things we were speaking about together and how that applies to DEI. I wanted to speak about the pandemic, right? We lived through a pandemic, we're in a pandemic still, and there was a lot of suffering and grief for individuals and for organizations. And IMAGO was part of this system, but also in this role of trying to help others. And I know there was work on organizational resilience that IMAGO did. But I guess what I want to get from you is, how did first IMAGO deal with the pandemic? How did we approach our partners and clients? And what is organizational resilience, the core of what we were doing there?
Thank you for that question. What was incredibly powerful, and I don't think we ever even thought about whether we should do it, is that soon as the pandemic hit, we understood that the people with whom we work were going to be disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And as it turned out, that was the case. And we also knew that from a relatively privileged position, that we had an opportunity to, if nothing else, create the space for people to come together collectively to speak to what this has been like, to offer what we were learning about resilience in the pandemic to others. But more importantly, as it turned out, in at least 2 of our engagements, to cry and grieve together from the losses, and to be able to just speak to the pain and to be held as much as you can be held through a screen like this. And to trust that we were actually there. And it's difficult for me right now because I'm remembering one of those workshops and the number of people who lost husband, brother, sister, mother, who themselves were devastatingly affected by the pandemic. The flood of that was just, so I think our job was just to be there. And what I didn't imagine was how important it was simply to listen, to be a witness to the realities. And so resilience isn't simply about bouncing back. I mean, what we talk about in terms of resilience is to create the conditions so that when things like this happen in the future, that we know that we're going to be able to bounce back, that we have ways of responding, that we can recognize that we are not alone with this, and that we can activate our human ecosystems so that we can support each other and grow into whatever that next moment will be. So for us, resilience is sort of understanding that while we don't want these moments, any of us, these are moments that also offer opportunities for learning. So as we are grieving, as we are facing loss, as we are in the devastation of it, let's pay attention also. And so that when we arise from this moment, what might we be able to do? And how might we be able to do it differently? And how might we continue to be present to each other so that we are able to live into who we might yet become together? That was a tough one.
Yeah, sorry, take a moment. It
Sorry.
also brought memories back to me. So yeah, happy to take a moment.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of memories and a lot of suffering globally. So I completely understand. Yeah, I also have a lot of stories from India, and I know many others do. And it really taught us a lot of things, I think, about how the world has changed, and really puts things in perspective. And I think has influenced us in ways that we're still discovering or like still haven't fully healed from. So I just have one last question. And of course, like this is just like zoning out of IMAGO and like thinking of development as a space. Where do you think we need to think of development differently is something I'm very interested in, and I thought maybe you can shed light on. But yeah, that's the last question.
The benefit of development in the humanitarian sector is that it recognizes that the systems that we have created for the last 500, 600 years were born out of exploitation, oppression, enslavement, colonialism, extraction of resources. And that the disproportionate impact on certain populations globally, and it's a different color, different hue, different peoples all over the planet, but nonetheless, the disproportionate impact is evident. And the next phase of development has to come to grips with and have accountability for what we collectively have created. The pessimist part of me fears that we've already gone past the tipping point because our exploitation of each other has led to an exploitation of the planet, which will then make it uninhabitable for our species in a real way. Now, that's the pessimist part of me. The optimist part of me believes that IMAGO, just like that caterpillar that had to struggle, that maybe this is that struggle moment as humanity, and that we're ready to actually spread our wings into a new evolution of ourselves. And that would require, in the humanitarian sector and development, for us to pay greater attention to our integral connectivity as humans, but also to the natural world and therefore to the planet. That it really does require much more of a Gaian understanding of the planetary unity. And I don't mean unity as in oneness. I mean unity in terms of it's one thing. The environment, equity, economics, these are one thing. We split them off into these different places and spaces, which mirrors the kind of polarization and antagonism we have on the planet. And development needs to figure out, how do we look at the nexus points, the nodes of those nexus points, to then have that sort of like open more spaces of interrelatedness, interdependence, internationality, interspecies, so that it becomes a thing. What I think IMAGO is trying to do is at least begin to say, okay, this way of doing development is important. Now let's have it evolve into a way of doing development where we're in conversation with the people that we are helping, to recognizing that by helping them, it helps us, that we're getting, and I'm not talking about economic benefit, I'm talking about benefit in terms of these inequities are being not managed, these inequities are being met by a different relationship. that the tending of the earth is being met by a relationship to the planet, that those things that allow for growth economically may not be about growth of humanity. And then development then has an opportunity to begin to look at these things. I'm not saying we know how to do it. I don't think we do. But I think that's the opportunity that is in front of us. And then from that opportunity, we have a chance. We have a chance for this planet, and us as inhabitants of this planet, to have a brighter tomorrow. I do believe.
Thank you so much for this interview. I know that you've been very generous with your time, but also with your thoughts, and for being so present and really pouring your heart out, I think. So thank you so much. And it's been my pleasure to have this interview with you. Thank you.
Thank you.